All these legal stories flowing out of the 2020 election and flowing out of the president leaving the White House continue. There's another one here with newly obtained records reportedly showing the Trump legal team hired computer experts to breach voting machines following the 2020 election. According to emails and other documents obtained by the Washington Post, Trump's attorneys paid an Atlanta-based forensic firm to successfully copy the hard drives of election servers from Georgia, Nevada, and Michigan. This was revealed after the firm was subpoenaed in a federal lawsuit involving Georgia's election security. A report on some of these alleged findings was then touted by Trump as, quote, absolute proof that the voting machines were rigged. But in a taped interview with the House January 6th Select Committee, former Attorney General William Barr called that report amateurish and said Trump would have to be, quote, detached from reality to believe it. Efforts to breach voting machines continued after the January 6th attack on the Capitol. The Post reporting that on the morning of January 7th, Trump's attorneys sent a team to Georgia to copy server data. Joining us now, one of the reporters who broke this story, the Washington Post, John Swain. John, good morning. This was an eye-popper when you guys dropped this yesterday. Let's start with what it means exactly to copy the data on an election machine, to take that server out of it. As a Trump election lawyer, Sidney Powell and the other crackpots who are running this operation were allegedly behind it. Is that even legal to do? How do you do that?
So these machines, as people would expect, are usually tightly guarded. Elections officials in counties and people with credentials are allowed to handle them, but there's tightly controlled chains of custody around them. You know, these are machines that handle votes and ballots that are sensitive and that shouldn't be interfered with. And what we see is these teams of forensic investigators going into Michigan, to Georgia, to Nevada, and essentially opening up the guts of these computers and taking images, copying files of servers. And the problem arises when some of these files are leaked online. We've seen that in Michigan, we've seen that in Colorado. They're downloadable by people who know what to do with them. They're visible to people who could maybe find vulnerabilities that weren't public. And what the plaintiffs in the lawsuit that you mentioned that actually uncovered these records say is that some of these people may be jeopardizing election security in the name of defending it.
But John, how do these people get access to election machines? In other words, you say that they were able to get in, but they weren't operating in any official capacity. They were just Donald Trump's lawyers. How do they get their hands on election equipment?
So we see a real mixture of how they got to these machines. In Georgia, in the case that we reported on, what seems to have happened is that local officials and local Republicans loyal to Donald Trump, who were convinced, like he was, that votes had been stolen or flipped and that there was fraud going on, simply thought that this was such a serious problem that they would get people in just by opening the door to their office. We spoke previously, my colleague spoke with a local official in Coffee County, Georgia, who said, I wanted these people just to sort of put the election right. She supported Donald Trump. She believed what Trump said. And so she allowed a Trump-connected businessman and these forensic investigators into her office and just let them look at the equipment. In other cases, we do see different processes where in Michigan, for example, there was a court order by a judge who was a Trump donor, allowed a similar team of forensic investigators and lawyers to go into county offices there in Antrim County, sort of before state officials even knew what was going on. And so what we see is Sidney Powell, people around her, finding all these different routes in, whether it's through sort of Republican judges, whether it's through Republican officials who agree with them about election fraud. And, I think it's important to say this is a sort of lesser known front in the Trump effort to overturn the election. We know about the protests. We know about the lobbying of Mike Pence in Congress. But this stuff was being done very quietly, very discreetly. The emails we obtained show that it was sort of compartmentalized. Some lawyers involved in some states weren't shown what was going on in other states. And they didn't really want to publicize this. They tried to do it quickly and stealthily. To get into these machines and somehow prove that votes had been flipped and that these machines were part of some foreign conspiracy to steal the election.
Yeah, John, your reporting certainly shows this is a far more coordinated and complicated effort than we all believed in those initial weeks after the election. But I want to ask you on this, is there any legal consequence perhaps for this effort here that could be forthcoming? And then secondly, what safeguards could be put in place to prevent something like this from happening again? Or is it going to remain vulnerable if a Trump-friendly precinct captain or whatever it might be allows something like this to happen in 2024?
We're seeing in some states that there are already legal consequences. So the Attorney General of Michigan has appointed a special prosecutor to investigate some of these people that are in the records we reported on for breaches of other counties in Michigan that were not protected by court order, that were secret until recently. In Colorado, a local elections official there who's accused of a breach of the system in Mesa County, she has been indicted on multiple felony counts. So, there are very serious consequences for people involved in these cases where the right legal permissions, the right authorities were not followed. And in terms of securing the systems in the future, I think the plaintiffs in this lawsuit, really what they're trying to do is to bring attention to these vulnerabilities that may arise when unauthorized people get access to the systems. And what we saw yesterday in Georgia was the Secretary of State's office coming out, having not found this information themselves when they reviewed the situation earlier this year, and saying rogue elections officials will not be tolerated in Georgia. And I think the more that state and county officials who are concerned about election integrity are aware of this kind of threat, of the threat of people slipping into offices in counties and accessing their machines, the more kind of regulations and the stricter controls on these machines they can hopefully bring in to secure them.
All right, the Washington Post, John Swain, thank you so much for your reporting this morning. And NBC